Welcome to another coding tutorial, and in today's video, we're going to be making this interactive display with rotating blocks. I have made a similar tutorial in the past. This one is going to be an update/upgrade. So if you have seen the previous one, feel free to skip to the part where I add new features. We're going to start by creating just one block to understand the mechanics of it. I'm going to use a function called rect, and rect takes in a total of 4 arguments. The first 2 are the x and y coordinate of the top left corner of the rectangle, and then the third and the fourth are the width and the height. So I'm going to put it at the center of the canvas. So width divided by 2, and then height divided by 2. And then the width and the height, let's do 100 by 50. So as you can see here, it is not at the center of the canvas because the x and y coordinate is at the top left corner of the rectangle. And we can change that easily by changing the rectangle mode using the function rect mode and then give an argument center. Now I want to rotate the rectangle, and we can use the function called rotate. And how about we rotate by 45 degrees? And because we're using the degrees mode, we also need to set the angle mode to degrees. And that is not how we want to rotate the rectangle. And the reason that it's doing what it just did, because the rotate function rotates around the origin point, and right now the origin point is at the top left corner of the canvas. So we also want to use a function called translate and put that before the rotate function. And translate is the function that translates the origin point, and we want to translate it to the middle of the canvas. So let's give it width divided by 2 here, and height divided by 2. And by doing this, now we can draw the rectangle at the new origin point. And there you go. Now the rectangle is rotated around the origin point, which is moved from this point to the middle of the canvas. How about I create a new variable called angle, and let's set it to 0. And then I can put angle here, and we can increment it by 1 degree at a time. And now the rectangle is rotated in the clockwise direction. Perfect. To make this interactive, we're going to have the rectangle rotate when the mouse is close to the rectangle. And we can do that by, first, let's set a new variable called distance. And I'm going to set it to a function called dist. And dist is a built-in function within p5.js that calculates the distance between 2 points. And the 2 points that I want to calculate is the location of my mouse, so mouse x and mouse y. And mouse x and mouse y are built-in variables within p5.js that outputs the location of my mouse. Now I want the distance between the mouse location and the center of the rectangle. So width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. So how about we also first print distance just to see. Then I'm going to comment this out. All right. So as I move closer and closer to the center of this rectangle, you can see that the distance becomes 0. Or closer to 0. Now that we have the distance calculated, we're going to use a conditional statement to check if the mouse is close to the rectangle. So we can use an if statement that says, if distance is less than, how about we set a new variable, let's call it dist mouse, for distance between the mouse and the rectangle is 50. So if distance is less than dist mouse, then I want to increment this angle here by 1 degree. So not moving, not moving, not moving. And then when the condition is satisfied, the rectangle is moving. Then it stops when the mouse is further away. Now that the code is working for one rectangle, let's put it in a class. So you just come to this arrow here, click a plus sign, and then click create file. I'm going to name this file block.js. And before we start writing the class, go to index.html file, and then come to this line of code here, copy and paste. And then change the name of this file to the name that you just created. So for my case, block.js. And this is how we integrate a new JavaScript file into the program. Let's go back to the class. We're going to start writing it by writing the word class, and then I'm going to call my class block. And then we're going to write two methods. One is the constructor function, and the other one is display. All right, so for the constructor function, we need X and Y location of the center of the rectangle. So I'm going to set these as variables, this.x and this.y. And for display, let's go back to our sketch.js file. And then we're going to copy these set of code here for drawing the rectangle. All right. And we need to tweak this a little bit. So instead of width divided by 2 and height divided by 2 here, we're going to put this.x and this.y. And then I'm going to also create a new variable here called this.angle and initialize it at 0. All right. And we also want another method called move. And this is the method where we check the distance and move the rectangle, rotate the rectangle. So we can copy this set of code and then put it in the move method. All right, and then we also need to change this to this.x and this.y. And then this mouse is already the global variable, so we can keep it as is. And then we need to also set angle to this.angle. Perfect. So now let's go back and let's try to create this one block object. We don't need this angle anymore. Okay, so I'm going to call it B, and B is going to be a new block object. And we're going to set it at, how about just the center of the circle? So width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. And then to call the function or the methods, we just do B, which is the name of our object, and then dot, and then the name of the method. So move, and then display. All right, so it's displaying, and then once the mouse is closer, the rectangle is moving. Great. All right. One more thing that I want to change before we move on is I want to also set the size here using a global variable size, which I need to also create. And then I'm gonna set it here as, how about 50? All right, so now it's a square. Now that we have this one block, let's create a grid of blocks. So I need a few new variables. So the first one is columns, second one is rows, and then we also have the size. And instead of just this variable block, I'm going to create a new array, and let's call it blocks. All right, so we're going to create a 2D array, and we can do that by using a nested for loop. That goes from I equals to 0 to I less than columns, right? And then in the inner loop is from j equals to 0 to j less than rows. In the outer loop here, we need to populate the blocks array with empty 1D arrays. And then inside the inner loop, we can now create a bunch of new block objects. And then for the arguments, it's not going to be this anymore. It's going to be I times size and j times size. I times size and j times size will allow us to create a grid of rows and columns of blocks that are spaced out by the distance size. All right, and then now we want to call the move and the display methods, and we are going to use the nested loop as well. So we can just copy and paste this, and then now just call move, then blocks of I and j dot display. What's going on? It is because first we have not yet calculate what calls and rows are. So first we need to calculate that. So columns will be the size of the width divided by this variable size here. And then rows will be height divided by size. All right, so this is not a grid that we want. And that is because we forgot two important functions called push and pop that are very important when we do any type of transformations. So let's go back to block.js. So essentially, right now that we do transformation, which is translating the origin point to this.x and this.y, we need to use the function push and pop. So we need to use the push function, which saves these two transformations, translate to this point and rotate at this angle. And then we need to use the pop function to return it back to the original setting where the origin point is at the top left corner of the canvas before we do the next translation for the next object block. And if we do that and click run, we get a grid. But this grid is not exactly what we want. So we want to shift the grid a little bit to the right and a little bit down. And that a little bit is actually by half the size to the right and then half the size down. So let's do that. Go back to sketch.js. And then here we need to put an offset of size divided by 2. And size divided by 2 here. All right, now we have a grid of blocks. And now when the mouse is closer, all the blocks are rotating. But as you can see here, when the mouse is no longer close, then the blocks stop moving. But what I want is that I want the blocks to keep moving until a specific angle before it stops moving. And that angle is 90 degrees, so it rotates exactly one rotation. All right, so we can do that by using an if statement inside the move function. So right now what we have is we say if the distance that we calculated between the mouse location and the center of the squares is less than a specific amount, then rotate the angle, right? Or increment the angle by 1 degree. Else, so right now we're going to say if it's not less than this dot mouse, I still want it to rotate, but only if this dot angle is more than 0 and also less than 90. Then I want it to continue to rotate. Else, so if it rotates more than 90 degrees already, then I want to set this dot angle to 0. All right, let's try that. All right, so as you can see here, the square stopped moving after it rotates 90 degrees. Looks really nice. Perfect. But now, if I don't move my mouse, the square keeps rotating, and that's not what I want. What I want to do now is I want the square to stop rotating if the mouse doesn't move. And to check whether the mouse is moving, we can use another built-in variables called p/x and p/y, which are the built-in variables for the location of the mouse previously. Inside the draw function, I'm going to print p/x and mouse x, and then p/y and mouse y. All right. So right now I'm moving my mouse, and then I stop. Then I move my mouse, then I stop. All right, so let's look at this. So as you can see here, when I move my mouse, right, you can see that the p/x versus mouse x, it's different because the location of the mouse x previously and the mouse x now are different. But when I don't move my mouse, then they're the same. So we can calculate the difference between p/x and mouse x and p/y and mouse y to see if I move my mouse. All right, let's delete this, then go back to block.js. So inside the move function, we're going to write a conditional statement that says if p/x minus mouse x is not equals to 0, or p/y minus mouse y is not equal to 0, meaning that we're moving the mouse, right? Then that's when I want to calculate this distance here. So let's copy this part and put it inside. All right, so I'm also going to declare the variable distance outside the if statement, and then we can do this. All right, so now we also don't need this else statement anymore. So we can just use another if statement here. So basically what we have is that we will only check the distance if the mouse is moving, right? That's the first conditional statement. The second one is checking if the angle is more than 0 or less than 90, meaning that if squares are already moving. So how about let's comment so that we know. So this one is if the mouse is moving, check distance between mouse location and center of square. And then for this one is if squares are already moving or already rotating, keep rotating until angle equals to 90. All right, it seems like I have an extra curly bracket. No, I didn't have enough. Okay, let's try that. All right. It's not working the way that I want it to work, right? Because it stopped. Stops before. What did we forget? So so we need to end this if statement before. All right. So this if statement of checking distance encapsulates this part. And then this is a new if statement. So let's try that. All right. And now when the mouse is not moving, then the squares are not rotating. Nice. Let's change the aesthetics of how this look. How about we make the size 10? Let's make it small. All right. Okay. And then how about we change the background color to black, and then let's go to block.js, and then we are going to do the stroke color to be white, and let's do no fill. Okay. And then actually I'm going to do the stroke color to be this.c, and I'm going to create a new variable here and set it to 255 for white. And then let's go back to sketch.js. Right now, all the squares are right next to each other. I actually wanted to have a slight gap between each one of them. So I'm going to create a new variable called offset, and let's set it to 4. And then if we go back to block.js, so instead of just drawing it at size, let's do size minus offset. All right, and actually instead of 255 here, I'm going to make it a little bit darker. And now I want to change the color of the squares to white when the distance is less than dist mouse. So let's do this.c equals to 255. Okay. But then now it's like drawing on the canvas, because even if the distance is not less than dist mouse anymore, it stays at 255. So we want to change that too. And we can do that by inside this conditional, we can decrement the color by, how about let's do 3. All right. And you also want to set it at 70 here when the angle is no longer satisfied this condition. You saw this, right? That it's like slightly black here. We can fix that easily by saying that we only want to decrement by 3 only if this .c is more than 70. Let's try that. All right, that's better. Perfect. Okay, and I'm going to make this mouse here to be smaller. All right. Now, instead of just drawing squares, we're also going to draw a different shape or an X shape. So inside here, instead of just drawing a rect here, I'm going to use the function called line. And the line function takes in a total of 4 arguments. So it's the X and Y coordinate of the 2 points that will connect to become a line. All right, so I'm also going to comment out the rotate function so it doesn't rotate. What if we draw it from 0, 0 to size, size? All right, can you see this? It's a little bit hard to see, so let's go back to sketch.js and let's make columns to, let's just do 1 by 1 and let's make size to be 100. Actually, let's do 4 by 4. So you can see here that because when we draw the rectangle, we need to move it out by a margin of size divided by 2, because when we draw the rectangle using the rect mode, everything is from the middle point of the square. So now we also want to move this back by negative size divided by 2. So if we go back to block, we can do that by, how about we create a variable called margin and then set it to negative size divided by 2. And I can do margin here, and then we want to add margin to this too. All right, so now everything moves where we want it to move. But we also want to add the offset. We want it to move it slightly to the right and slightly down by half of the offset. So we can do margin plus offset divided by 2 for the first 2 arguments. So for the third and the fourth arguments, we want to subtract the offset by the same amount. All right, you can't really see, it's quite small, but that is working. All right, so now we want a new line that goes the other way. So it's going to be, so let's start simple. So it's going to be what? Size 0 and then 0 size. Okay, and then now we want to first add the margin, right? So we want to move everything to the left and up. Okay, and then now we need to work with the offset. So for the first one, we need to subtract by offset divided by 2, and then plus offset divided by 2 for the y variable. And then for the third one, we need to add by offset divided by 2, and then we need to subtract by offset divided by 2. Okay, let me change the offset here to, how about I do 40, so you can see that it's actually is working. All right, okay, so if we go back to block.js again, I'm going to put this whole thing here inside a new method, and let's call it drawX. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing for rectangle. So draw rect, and I'm going to move this set of code here. Okay, so now when we want to call a method within a class, all we have to do is we just put the name of that method, so draw x, right? And we just need to put the word this dot. We get what we have here. If we go back to sketch.js and then just make, we don't need to set 4x4 here anymore. Set the offset to 4 and then the size back to 10. And then uncomment this. All right, so now we have a different shape. Why did I make two shapes? Basically, this tutorial is inspired by this website here called AnyPixel, which is a project by Google Creative Lab, an open source software and hardware library to make interactive display. But as you can see here, they have a really cool interactive display, which is exactly what we're trying to do. And they have two shapes. They have the X shape and then they have the square shape. So that's what we're going to do for the last step. All we need to do actually is come to this part here inside the display method, and we're going to write a conditional statement that says if this dot angle is more than 0 and this dot angle is less than, I'm going to do 45. Then I want to draw the squares. Else, then draw x. Let's see what happens. So now it's all x because this dot angle is equals to 0, right? Initially. And then now, you see that? We get a mix of two shapes. This is my take on making an interactive display with rotating blocks. What if you create your own version by creating different shapes, maybe change the colors, or even maybe change the speed at which things rotate? Give it a try.